A gap in your resume can be a huge barrier to getting a new job, but it can also be no big deal. It really depends how you explain it. So let me, as a certified resume strategist, explain to you exactly how I explain gaps in my clients' resumes so that the person reading it is paying more attention to all the great things they have done and not worrying about the gaps, so that they can get excited and invite them in for an interview. Now, I want everyone in this community to know employment gaps are extremely common. Most people have them. I've helped people come back from 1-year gaps, 2-year gaps, 5-year gaps, even 10-year gaps in experience. So just so we are all on the same page and we know we're not alone, I would really appreciate if you took a second to explain in the comments how long of a gap that you have on your resume. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what types of gaps in experience need to be explained and which ones we can just ignore. I'm also going to teach you how to explain those employment gaps on your resume in a very simple way. And I'm going to even walk you through when it is okay to mask the truth a little bit about why we were away from work. And this is to protect ourselves from any biases that the hiring manager or recruiter might have. So, when do we even need to explain the gaps in our resume? Well, I'll tell you this, it's a lot less often than you might think. Most gaps are totally fine to just be ignored. For example, if the gap is less than 6 months long, you may completely ignore this gap, even if it is to present. Now, if the gap is between 6 months and a year, but it was not in the last 2 years, you can again completely ignore this. This is totally fine. They will gloss right over it. Now, if the gap is between 1 and 2 years, but it's more than 5 years ago, again, this is not something we specifically need to talk about in our resume. The reason being is that by having worked the last 5 years straight, you have alleviated any concern that the hiring manager might have that you don't have the staying power to be committed to this new job that you're applying to. The same goes with if the gap is more than 2 years long, but is over 10 years ago. We do not have to worry about this at all. In fact, you have the option to just start your experience after that gap. Now, if you do want to go past the gap and you're worried about having a couple of years blank on your resume, but those blanks are over 10 years ago, this is not something a hiring manager is going to be very concerned about. And in most cases, we can just leave this completely blank and not mention the gap at all. Now, up next, I'm going to tell you exactly how to explain these gaps in your resume. But first, it would mean a lot to me if you took a second to like and subscribe to this channel, because I am putting out all of my best job search advice here on YouTube, and I would hate for you to miss any of it. Now, let's talk about how we are explaining these gaps in our resume. Now, when it comes time to explain these gaps in our resume, we do not want to give too much detail. In fact, we want to give as little detail as possible, which is why none of my explanations are more than 3 words long. So, all we're going to do on our resume is we're going to list a type of leave that we took, then the dates, and that is it. So we may list educational leave if we were studying during this time. If we had a child or we were caring for our children, parental leave. If we had a loved one who was ill and we were taking care of them, we call that family care leave. If you relocated and you were just having trouble finding a job, or you didn't have time to job search because you were moving, we call that relocation leave. If you were traveling for an extended time, we call it travel leave. Although I caution you on travel leave, of these types of leave, it is really the only one that an employer is going to ask about. So if you list travel leave, just make sure that you have a solid story of all the traveling you did, because if you were off for 6 months and you went to Fort Lauderdale for a week during that time frame, that is not going to hold up when the interviewer asks you about your travel. Now, there's other types of leave. These are the most common ones. These are usually my go-tos. And again, just remember, we want to be very brief about this. Name of leave, dates, and that's it. We move on to the next part of our experience. Now, 2 other common reasons for employment gaps that we are going to talk about now are if, number 1, you personally were sick and you couldn't work, or number 2, you were just looking for a job the entire time and could not find someone to hire you. So personally, if you were sick or injured or had some health circumstance that prevented you from working, we do need to be careful about how we share this information, because even though it is illegal to discriminate against someone for having any personal health issues, this is often a thing that is not enforceable in any sort of way. So by sharing that we were on personal sick leave or medical leave, we open ourselves up to biases. So what I will often recommend, if you are comfortable, is explaining a gap like that by calling it family care leave. Now, essentially, the reason we're doing this is, number one, you certainly are a member of your family, and by taking care of yourself, you are also preparing yourself to be able to take better care of your family. So this is true, but also, and more importantly, family care leave does not raise the same kind of red flags to a biased employer who is going to be worried about you getting sick again and taking extended time away from work while you are working for them. So this is why we prefer to call this family care leave than personal health leave or sick leave. Now for the big one, if you simply were not able to find work this entire time, sometimes our best option is to just not explain it and hope that they are so interested in the other great stuff in our resume that they don't mind. Alternatively, you can ask yourself, what were some things that I was doing during that time where I wasn't working? Did I take any courses that I could call this educational leave? Did I go on any significant travel where I could call this a travel leave? Did you advise or support a friend or a colleague who runs their own business and we could list some consulting work at this time? We sometimes have to get creative to fill in these gaps, but otherwise, it is okay to just leave them blank. In that case, though, we do want to make sure the rest of the content in our resume is very impressive so that they are willing to look past any gap and just hire us because they want us for what we've accomplished during the work that we have done. Now, whether you have a big gap in your resume that you can explain or not, the most important thing when you have gaps in your resume is that the rest of the resume is very impressive. Now, I've taken a lot of my best advice and tips and put them into these other videos about resume writing, and I would highly recommend you check those out so you make sure your whole resume is a 10 out of 10 whether you have gaps or not. I'll see you over there.